Hey friends, Ash here, welcome back to Gents. Hope that you're doing well. Over the years, I have smelled and purchased hundreds, if not thousands, of cologne fragrances. And with that in mind, I want to share with you guys a lot of what I've learned and put together a buying guide for colognes for you. So if you don't know exactly where to start, where to buy, what the brands are, what any of this means, this video is for you. And I'll have linked in the description where you can find a lot of the stores and things that I'm talking to you about today, just in case you want to check them out yourself. So first off, what are cologne fragrances? Why do they even matter? Well, it's basically in the name. A cologne fragrance is cloning, emulating, duping another fragrance. And there has been a massive cologne boom over the past few years, and it's for a lot of different reasons. Reason number one, cologne fragrances have gotten way, way better than they used to be. If you go back 10 years ago, the overwhelming majority of cologne fragrances were terrible, just absolutely awful. The majority of them were chemical bombs, just smell like bug spray. But over time, they've gotten better and better and better to the point that you have cologne fragrances now that rival the quality and smell of much more expensive designer and niche fragrances. Reason two, cologne fragrances can very often give you access to discontinued or, again, much more expensive scents. So if you have a discontinued fragrance that you loved, but now you can't find it or it's $400 on eBay, there may be a cologne fragrance for 10% of the price. Reason three, experimentation. Cologne fragrances sometimes will come out with hybrids or even tribrids, which can be really interesting scents to throw into your rotation. And reason four, fragrances keep getting more expensive. Designers and niche nowadays are nuts in terms of pricing, and they continue to rise. Cologne fragrances, on the other hand, way, way cheaper. So that's kind of cologne fragrances in a nutshell. Here's some of the vernacular that you might hear when you hear people speaking about colognes. First off, clone, which is just what it sounds like. It's trying to clone something else. You might also hear inspired by or an alternative to, and that's pretty much the same thing. You also might hear about a fragrance clone being a twist, which essentially means that it smells quite similar to something else. It's taking the stylings, the DNA of another fragrance, but they're putting their own twist on it. So maybe they're ramping up the sweetness a whole lot to give it a different styling, a different feel. Maybe they're taking the citrus and ramping it way up. Maybe they're taking the woods and the smoke and ramping it down. Maybe they've added a new note in there, you know, something to give it a little twist. I mentioned this just a second before, but hybrid you might see. A lot of times what that is taking two fragrances that are really popular and putting them together. So for example, Aventus and Baccarat Rouge 540, put them together, it doesn't smell the same as either one of them, it is now a hybrid. And then the biggest one, maceration or a maturation. Maturation? Yeah, what? You'll hear this all the time with cologne fragrances. Essentially what it means is letting a fragrance sit. So more specifically, let's say you get a fragrance in, a cologne fragrance, and you go ahead and spray it on. And you go, I don't know, man. I've read that's better. That's kind of harsh. Well, what a lot of people will tell you to do is let it sit for weeks, maybe even a month, and then come back to it. And sometimes those fragrances actually get much nicer. I know it sounds like total bro science, but there are lots of people who will swear by that. And I've actually experienced it myself as well with some fragrances that I got in and I thought they were garbage, came back to them weeks later and they smelled amazing. Now let's talk the fragrance clone brands. This is gonna take a second. We're gonna work through each brand. I'll tell you kind of general thoughts on them, and if there are any big fragrances that jump out from that brand that you need to know about. But obviously, I'm not gonna go through every fragrance from all these brands because this video would never end. Legitimately, it would never end. There are so many fragrances that come out almost every single day that by the time I started to get toward the end of the list, there'd be 500 more. And this is not an exhaustive list of every single cologne fragrance brand, but it's a lot of them, mainly the big ones. First off, Lattafa, which is also Maison Alhambra. More specifically, Maison Alhambra is a sub-brand, but it's the same company. Lattafa, pretty much the biggest cologne house out there nowadays, and Maison Alhambra also really well known. Maison Alhambra typically a little bit cheaper than Lattafa, and Maison Alhambra also is one of those cologne houses that really tries to emulate everything. And by that I mean they try to get the exact same bottle stylings. The name is really super close. I mean, you can look at some Maison Alhambra fragrances over here versus the real deal and see what I'm talking about. And that can lead to issues because some of those brands don't really take kindly to that, and that has caused Maison Alhambra to have to go in change names, change bottle styles, but that's kind of what they're known for. And for the price, most Maison Alhambra fragrances are really good quality, but they are typically slightly lower quality than most Latafas from their main lines. And when we're talking Latafa, probably the biggest one is Kamra, which now has a couple of different flankers that have come out. Kamra is like a sweeter take on an angel shared DNA, also similar to Gisa Sava. Latafa Assad, also huge, extremely affordable, smells similar to Sauvage Elixir. And then one of their newer ones, Art of Universe, which smells similar to Blue Talisman. In terms of pricing, Latafa typically is going to be around $20 to $40, depending on what you're looking at. Maison Alhambra, a little bit similar, but typically slightly cheaper. And anywhere you go, you will see Latafa being talked about, and for good reason. They're extremely wearable, the quality is good for the price, if not great, and the presentations for the most part are eye-catching as well. Then there is Fragrance World / French Avenue. So this is the same kind of thing with Latafa, right? Fragrance World, French Avenue, same company, but this time kind of reversed. French Avenue is actually a little bit higher quality than Fragrance World. And French Avenue pumps out a lot of stuff, or Fragrance World pumps out a lot of stuff. Talking about French Avenue, they're typically slightly more expensive than Latafa, but not always. It really is fragrance dependent. And Fragrance World, of course, is going to be a little bit cheaper than French Avenue. As far as the fragrances you need to know about, Liquid Brune is probably the biggest one. That is Altair, Parfums de Marly's Altair. They have a newer one, Vulcan Faux, which is God of Fire. And for my taste, that's probably the best God of Fire alternative out there today. And then one that I absolutely love from Fragrance World is Starmin Nebula. Really inexpensive and a clone of the discontinued Pure Malt from Terry Mugler. And over time, French Avenue and Fragrance World have gotten more and more popular to the point that they may be the second most popular clone house that's being talked about today. But if they're not the second most, then Armaf, I would say, definitely is. Armaf is most well known for Club de Nuit Intense Man, which is an Aventus clone, and there are a lot of Club de Nuit fragrances out there. That's really their flagship line. Price-wise, Armaf is kind of similar to Latafa. There's not a massive difference, but they do have some fragrances that are a little bit more on the pricey side. So for example, Club de Nuit Pursue 1, that is Absolute Aventus, and that's a little bit more expensive. Armaf, a little bit like Latafa, has some attention-grabbing presentation styles. The quality typically pretty good on those. Some people might say slightly tacky depending on which one you're talking about, but some of their presentations do look fantastic, especially for the price point. And in terms of quality, Armaf, extremely good. There is a reason that Armaf, Latafa, and French Avenue / Fragrance World are pretty much the three biggest ones out there. And it's because they all three hit what you want. They give you the high quality, they give you an eye-catching presentation typically. Sometimes they're a little bit on the cheaper side, more specifically with Latafa and some of their more affordable ones. But yeah, quality, presentation, performance typically very good, and price. Those are your three best bets, your safest bets if you're just getting started into fragrance clones, and they have so many to choose from. Then there's also Afnan. Afnan has some great quality scents. Actually, in terms of just straight up quality, Afnan is right toward the top. They consistently put out stuff that performs extremely well, even their fresher fragrances. Their quality, as I said, very, very good. Their presentation, usually not quite as ostentatious as a lot of the others. Like Latafa, a lot of times puts out fragrances that do have a lot of sweetness to them. That's really kind of one of the things they're known for. Of course, there are gonna be outliers. There are gonna be fragrances that aren't super sweet, but a lot of them are. Afnan kind of hits all the different types. They don't necessarily lean extremely hard in one direction is what I'm trying to say. And they also have sub-brands. So Rubraka is one, Zamaya is one, and those ones also have some extremely high quality scents for great prices. Afnan possibly, as time goes on, could be one of the brands that makes the most noise. If they start releasing more stuff, I think that they could really just blow up, more so than they already have, because they have some stuff that, as I said, really ticks all the boxes. Some of the more well-known ones are gonna be Tarathi Blue. Great performance, great quality. That one smells similar to Bulgari's Tiger. Supremacy, not only intense, which is gonna give you kind of a Hassabat styling, and then Rare Carbon, which smells similar to Ombre Leather from Tom Ford. And of course, probably the biggest from Afnan 9 PM, which is Ultramar. From there, Paris Corner. Now, Paris Corner to me is hit or miss, much more than the last ones that we've talked about. Pretty much Afnan, French Avenue, Armaf, Latafa, you know what you're in for. I mean, they may have the odd fragrance here or there that doesn't crush for you, that doesn't absolutely blow you away, but for the most part, you're in good hands. It's pretty safe. Paris Corner, I have found, is really hit or miss. Some of their fragrances are great. Some of the stuff that they put out, really, really nice for the price point. Other fragrances, weak performance, kind of a synthetic screechiness to them, especially off the top. Some Paris Corner fragrances, when you first spray them on, you're like, ooh, you know, it's a little rough. Now they do have sub-brands. So there's Emir, there's North Stag, for example. There's Pandora scents. Most Pandora scents, things that I've tried, have been not very good. Just compared to what you can get from other brands, a lot of Pandora scent stuff to me is not nice. North Stag though, really solid. Pretty much everything North Stag I've tried has been good. And then Emir is not, for me, quite as good as North Stag, but better than Pandora scents in Paris Corner. So I know it gets confusing, like I said, but there is a hierarchy with Paris Corner, and you really wanna kind of make sure that what you're looking at from that brand is well received. Because most of the time you're gonna be blind buying, and like I said, they're real hit or miss. Jo Milano is up next, and Jo Milano is an interesting one because they kind of position themselves as like premium clones. What I mean by that is, if you look at the MSRP pricing for Jo Milano, it is astronomical. And by MSRP, I mean go to Jo Milano's website, their own website, look at what they're selling for stuff there. Some of their fragrances, 280 bucks. And then a lot of the others are over 100, like 140 plus. Now, you obviously would want to be buying any of these fragrances I talked to you about at discounters, but especially so Jo Milano. Now, the quality is typically good. I wouldn't say that it's like better necessarily than the other big dog clone houses, but a lot of times they are louder, so they do have more performance a lot of the time. Not always, of course, but that's kind of one of the things they're known for. Pretty strong performance for most Jo Milanos. The question is, how much are you gonna pay for it, right? So I would not pay 140 bucks, I would not pay 80 bucks, but if you can find a Jo Milano for, you know, 40, 50, something like that, then at that point, it's probably worth checking out. It just really depends on what the fragrance is going for at that time frame, because I've seen Jo Milano fragrances at discounters for 140, then a week later, they're discounted to like 80, and then a week later, they're 140 again, and then they're 90, then they're 120. So it's just really all over the place. And that is because of how they positioned the brand. They want to be seen as like the higher end clones. And I think that you really want to get them at the sweet spot. 40 bucks, 50 bucks. If you're paying a lot more than that, there are better alternatives out there. Then there is Dua and Alexandria fragrances. These are often kind of lumped together, and they do have a lot of similarities. They come in smaller bottles, for example. They are extrait to parfum concentrations, so they will leave kind of like an oily sheen on your skin, but they're well known for good performance. They also do a whole lot of like hybrids, tribrids, and even more. And they have enormous backlogs, huge backlogs. So just about everything under the sun, they have cloned. They have massive followings, extremely popular within their own communities. They also typically run sales quite often. So if you go to their website, almost always they'll have like a sale at the top of the website, so you don't want to be paying full price. But on a per milliliter basis, they are going to be much more expensive typically than other clone fragrances because they do come in smaller bottle sizes. And I've tried a number of Dua and Alexandria fragrances over the years. Some of them were absolutely fantastic, others were not so much. But I will say, of the ones that I've tried more recently from both, they have been better than when I tried a long time ago. Then there is Montaigne. Montaigne I used to lump together with like alt fragrances and Dossier, which we'll talk about in a second. They come in a very standard bottle style, basically like a stock 50 ml bottle, little sticker on the front, not anything too crazy, but they have been gaining a lot of steam, and it's because the quality is typically really, really good. It's just right there on the shelf, so I grabbed one. This is what they look like. Like I said, pretty standard. This one is Lanui 2011, which I actually reviewed recently. They have great quality. They're pretty transparent, actually. If you follow them on social media, they tell you like what they put into each one of these, or not always all of them, but they'll give you like behind the scenes, like this is what we put in here and blah, 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 just in case you're interested. But they are surprisingly really fantastic. If you're into clone fragrances, you should check them out. They also have an extremely dedicated following. They have their own subreddit. You can also check actually the Fragrance Clones subreddit. The people there tons of knowledge, and that would be a great place to check as well, just in general. But yeah, Montana, they are really fantastic. Blew me away when I first checked them out. I was fully expecting them to suck, quite frankly, and they did not. That brings me to Dossier, which is kind of similar to Montana in the sense that it's like a stock bottle, standard little sticker. They do have magnetic caps, which I like, but Dossier for me has been very hit or miss. So I've purchased, I think, 8 or 9 fragrances from there over the years, and the majority of them were not that close. So whatever they were trying to emulate, it was a little iffy. Quality was not quite there. The price point is not awful as far as most fragrance clone houses that are kind of in that style. And by that style, I mean like we cut out the middleman type style. There were a couple that I purchased from there that were really good, but some of them, like the Aventus clone that I got, was just so different that it wasn't even usable, at least as an alternative to Aventus. And so for Dossier, I have not really been impressed. They also do a whole lot of advertising, which you may have seen on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. So like Montana, I actually found out about afterwards. I was doing a video where I was purchasing stuff from Alt and Dossier, and it led me to Montana, and surprisingly, they were the best ones, even though they were the ones that I had heard of none up until that point. So, and then there's Alt fragrances, which, so again, kind of like a stock bottle, they slap a sticker on the front, Alt Caribbean Water number 52 Extrait de Parfum. Alt fragrances for me falls like in between Dossier and Montana, but they do end up smelling a little bit like mall kiosk clones, if that makes any sense. Like if you have a mall kiosk in your mall where they're like, oh, we'll clone whatever for you. Kind of like that. Quality's not terrible, they're wearable. It's just there are better things out there most of the time. Then there's Dupe, D-U-P-P-E, and they real hit or miss. So a lot of complaints about long shipping times, leaking bottles. They're actually from Chicago, and I reached out to them actually before this video and asked about that because there have been some issues. And they said that when they started that they just did like screw-on bottle caps, and it caused like a big issue with leaking and returned orders and just a huge mess. And they say that they've now upgraded and they're like crimping bottles now and doing it properly. I haven't ordered from them since all of that stuff happened, since like they changed things over. But you know, I'll give them another chance, I guess. The quality of the fragrances is pretty good. It's just the issue of getting them. And then Haramain, can't forget Haramain. Haramain used to be, I would say, one of the biggest out there, the biggest of them all. But what happened is over time, they just did not release quite as many fragrances as say Armaf, Lattafa, French Avenue, Afnan, some of these other brands that have kind of leapfrogged them. And also a lot of Haramain's fragrances, not all of them, but a lot of them are a little bit more expensive than their competitors. And so not as much output, a little bit costlier, smaller bottles sometimes as well, and they are not quite as popular as they used to be. That being said, Haramain does have some fantastic releases. L'Aventure, for example, really well known. Aventus clone, L'Aventure Night is a Green Irish Tweed clone, and that's night like with armor, not night like it's nighttime outside. And they also have the Amber Oud series, which interestingly enough, a lot of those do not have oud or amber. So yeah, but quality-wise, really good. And that is kind of the story for Haramain. Quality is gonna be there. It's gonna be nice, it's gonna be well done, it's gonna be well blended, it's gonna smell good. Price, it's probably gonna be a little bit pricier than the other alternatives out there. Not always, but most of the time gonna be a little pricier. Performance, usually quite good as well. And not quite as popular for the most part compared to the other big brands nowadays. Codage is up next, and Codage is interesting in the sense that they market a lot on TikTok, but they don't have a ton of fragrance releases. But the fragrance releases they do have are typically quite good, and they're usually priced like middle of the pack, sometimes even cheap. So Shiaka Silver, for example, presentation on that awful. I think it looks terrible, but a really nice alternative to Reflection from Amouage. Then you have Island, which is a newer release, which does look a bit nicer. That one is Le Beau. It might be Le Beau Le Parfum, but yeah, Le Beau. And then there's Vanilla Dunes, which that is Altair, and that one is also really well done. It's technically Island Vanilla Dunes. So Codage is one of those brands that's kind of on the periphery, but they do have good quality fragrances, even though sometimes their presentations, depending on which one you're looking at, don't look quite as nice, look a little cheaper. It is a quality brand. After that, Rayhon, which is another brand that has done a good amount of advertising on TikTok, but they continue to get better and better. So Rayhon, their first releases were not bad. It was like these aquatic releases, Pacific, got a whole lot of hype. They weren't bad, but it was kind of like overhyped. And then as time has gone on, they've released a few more fragrances, and each one has continually gotten a bit better. As of this video, I think the most recent one is Crimson, which I think is the best one that they've released. And that is Creed Centaurus. That one is really good as far as the quality goes. They also have a solid Le Male Elixir alternative, which is called Elixir. And then Lion, which is also really good. That's like a very strong Ultra Male. And so Rayhon is kind of like a brand in its infancy almost. They don't have a huge amount of releases just yet, but they are on the correct trajectory in the sense of each thing getting better as time goes. And like I said at the beginning of the video, it's kind of how it's gone with clones in general. They started off like, oh, not so good. And then over time, it's like, oh, now we're getting somewhere. And that's essentially Rayhon. It was here, and now it's here, and you just gotta see what comes next. But as far as the price, they are ultra affordable sometimes. Like some of them are just absolutely steals. Corium, for example, a great alternative to Stronger With You leather, which is discontinued, very expensive. And also Rayhon, really good performance as well for the most part. So that's one to watch. I think as time goes on, that may be one of the ones that gets bigger and bigger. Then there's Oaka. Kind of an interesting name, Oaka. Real hit or miss. I think of any of the brands we've talked about, they may be the ones that like push the most on TikTok, like just advertising out the wazoo. They do leave like an oily kind of slick where you spray, that kind of sheen, if you want to call it that. And some of their fragrances smell really nice quality. Other fragrances, screechy, just kind of not put together super well. And so that's a brand that is very much like, really depends on which one you're getting. Some of them, you'll get them and be like, oh, fantastic. Other ones, you'll get them and be like, oh God, terrible. And I will say, like for Oaka especially, or any of the brands that sell directly from their own websites, you may wanna check somewhere else for reviews if you're looking up reviews, because you know they can kind of make it say what they want it to say, right? And of course, we cannot forget Rasi. Massive. Rasi is huge. Their biggest one's Hawass and La Yucawam from back in the day. That is Tuscan leather. And they even have some more affordable ones, like It's Essential, which is a clone of L'Homme Ultime, which is now discontinued. And Rasi is really a tale of two brands. So when you look up Rasi, they have more expensive fragrances, which are gonna be like Hawass and La Yucawam. Not that Hawass is crazy expensive, but they have their more expensive fragrances, and those are typically known for really high quality, great performance. Then they also have fragrances that are on the cheap side, so it'll be like 20 bucks or so. And those ones are a little bit more hit or miss. When they hit the cheap ones, they're fantastic, like It's Essential. But sometimes they do smell cheaper, obviously, because they are cheaper. And so you can't necessarily judge Rasi across the entire board, because it really does depend on like, is it one of their higher end premium ones, or is it one of their super cheap ones? Swiss Arabian would be the final brand we talk about here. So Swiss Arabian at discounters, typically really nicely affordable, 20 bucks, maybe touching 40 for the most part. Maybe the occasional one that's a little bit higher, but kind of in that range. Some of their fragrances are great. Shaghof Oud Azrak, for example, that is fantastic. But they also do have some other ones where like the atomizers are really not good at all. They sometimes leak around the collar a little bit, and there'll be clones of fragrances that are just not super interesting. So with Swiss Arabian, it really depends. The ones that they hit with are amazing for the quality. The ones they miss with are big misses. So that's another one where you need to really be careful in what you're buying. Oh, and Dumont, yeah, because I grabbed this thing. Dumont. So Dumont is Dumont Nitro Red Intense, all of the nitro fragrances. It's also the Ramon Blazar fragrances, and then the Celerio fragrances. So that's kind of like all the same company there. The nitro ones are actually the cheaper ones. And Nitro Red Intensely, both amazing if you're looking for a super versatile fragrance. Oh, and there's also Baroge. So that's another one. They get a lot. But I will say those other ones, Baroge, Celerio, Ramon Blazar, like those are great. Across the board, the quality, really high. They are typically more expensive. Those are ones that are usually at the perfume box, but you can find them other places as well. So it really just depends on if you want to pay that extra amount, but the quality on those typically really good. Now let's talk about where to buy clone fragrances. Where do you pick these up? Well, as I said before, really you want to be shopping at discounters. You can sometimes go into a store and find these. Like, you can go into Perfumania, for example, I think, and they carry Arm Off, but they're gonna charge you way more than if you just buy from a discounter. So usually that's not a good idea to try to find these like in a physical location. So like I said, the perfume box, you can shop there. Actually, I have codes for a lot of these stores, so I'll put those up right now. So any of these codes you can use to save yourself money across all these stores, whether you're shopping for designer, niche, or clones. And the JOMASHOP codes, those change every quarter, so be aware of that. And they also only work within the app. Great 15% off codes for Gift Express, Intense Oud, and many more. So anyway, the perfume box, they typically have amazing deals on clone fragrances, so I would check there, absolutely. Gift Express has a ton, and the 15% off obviously helps a lot. JOMASHOP, Fragrance Buy, two of the biggest discounters out there. That's for everything though. They carry everything all those stores do. So it's not just clone specific, right? They carry the whole lot. Fragrance Buy is in Canada, but they ship really quickly to the US. JOMASHOP is in the US. And they actually have a thing on there that tells you how long it'll be before they ship each item, because sometimes it's not next day. It might be something that's like back ordered. So you got to check that. Fragrance Net, you can check, but Fragrance Net is not as good for clones a lot of times. They're kind of like behind with that, really. Like Fragrance by JOMASHOP, Perfume Box, Gift Express, they typically have more in stock than Fragrance Net nowadays. Like Fragrance Net will have the big ones, the really big ones, but some of those smaller ones or lesser known ones, they probably won't have. There's also Maple Prime. There is Best Brands Perfume. Both of those stores carry a bunch of different clone fragrances. Triple Traders pretty much specializes in clone fragrances. So does Intense Oud. So both of those, absolutely check for your clone fragrances if that's what you're after. And a lot of times you can actually find some of the lesser known stuff at those. Intense Oud, especially with like the 15% off, can have some amazing deals. Now you can buy directly from brands, but that doesn't always work out the best in your favor. Because like I said earlier, with like Joe Milano, you buy directly from them, 280 bucks. It's an awful deal a lot of the times. And it's not just Joe Milano. A lot of these brands at full retail MSRP, like if you bought directly from them, the prices are worse. A lot of times much worse than if you go through a discounter. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense. The times that it does make sense is brands like Dua, Alexandria, Montaigne, who are selling directly to you and they're not really carried at all at discounters because they don't have like the super jacked up price. They just have whatever the price is, right? Also, you can buy from Amazon, but when you do shop on Amazon, you need to be careful, I guess the best way to put it. There are countless fakes of fragrances out there nowadays, especially on eBay and Amazon. Now, when it comes to clones, most of the time you're fine, right? Because it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to clone something that retails for 30 bucks or sells for 30 bucks. They would rather make a fake of like a more expensive niche fragrance and then sell it for 60 or something. But the really popular stuff out there, like the stuff that is going to sell like this, talking about clone fragrances, those are at some risk of being faked. And Amazon does have some fakes on there. So you can absolutely shop safely on Amazon. You just need to make sure that you're buying from legitimate sellers, basically. I know it sounds like common sense, but sometimes if you're shopping and you're just like, oh, add to cart, buy now, just whatever is like on the sidebar there, and you don't actually look at who you're purchasing from, you could get into a little headache, you know? So just make sure whoever you're buying from on Amazon, and really it's good to do this anywhere, but make sure whoever you're buying from is a legitimate seller. Don't be buying from somebody with terrible feedback or a brand new account or something like that. A lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time fakes will come from China, come from Hong Kong, places like that. So that's another thing to look out for. But you can buy fragrances from Amazon as well. So that is a rundown on most of the brands that you'll see, most of the stores that you should be looking at, codes that you can use, vernacular you might hear, all of that. I think the biggest clone brands at this point are, as I mentioned before, Lattafa, Armaf, French Avenue / Fragrance World, probably Offnon. But a lot of the other ones have stuff that's just as good. So, you know, you should definitely look across all the different offerings out there and see what works for you. But those are probably the easiest ones to kind of start off with. And then for sure, for me, the best one that's like selling direct that you don't find at discounters is Montaigne at this point. I know there's a lot of brands that I left out because it's just already run really long, but maybe in the future I'll touch on some of those as well. Thank you guys for hanging with me here today. Stay safe out there, take care of yourselves, I'll see you tomorrow with another fragrance video. See you guys.